Hey, welcome to our class for this week. Now, what I wanted to do was look at the homework from last week and go over it with a set of notes just to kind of make sure that you're on the right track. So, what we're going to do again is take a look at this homework last week. It's called Homework 1. It was online and it's about indifference curves and budget lines, and I want to step you through it. So, let's take a look. Okay, so here we have our homework here on the left. And then on the right, I've kind of got my notes as I work my way through this. Now, I've went ahead and there's two graphs on your homework, and I kind of drew them, in this example form on the graph. So what you end up with is those two were budget lines and indifference curves. So each of those had a $50 budget. And if you look at the top of the homework, the first budget, it was $50. The price of fish was $2.50, and the price of pork was $4.50. This creates a potential quantity, and that's how we deal with the first budget. And again, this was given to you. The quantity of the fish is potentially a 20-pound purchase, and the quantity of pork works out to be 11.11. And you got that by dividing 50, the budget, by those prices. Now, budget 2 in the middle of the page was part of the homework, and so let's just go straight to that. Budget price of fish was still $2.50, but the budget price of pork changed to $2, so that's the change. So as a budget, how much could you buy of each? Well, you could buy 20 units of fish, the same as the first budget, and you could buy 25 units of pork, which is also the change. And so this gives us budget 1 and budget 2, and those were the parts of the homework, especially budget 2, that you had to deal with. So I'm going to label these on the graph up there. Budget 1 is the first line, and budget 2 is the second line that allows you the potential to buy 25 pounds of pork. Of course, 20 pounds of fish could be bought either way because there's no change in the price. Now, these budget lines and these indifference curves come together to create what we call equilibrium. So on the first graph, the equilibrium was already given to you, and I identified it on the graph. And so again, I'll review that here. So with the equilibrium of budget 1, you could buy, and this is going to be an approximate number here based on the notes I have, but about 9 units of fish. And that was of course at $2.50. So 9 units of fish to check our budget at $2.50 is $22.50. If you got a $50 budget, that leaves you then about $27.50 to spend on, in this case, pork. And if you divide it by that high price of pork, $4.50, that then gives us about 6.11 pounds of, in this case, pork that we could possibly buy. So if you look at that first indifference curve and budget line, that is how we got to this equilibrium quantity of 6 and 9. Again, that's kind of given to you in the first homework. And so that lets us look at that if you could have the prices of $2.50 and $4.50 for pork and fish respectively, you ended up with 9 units of fish and 6.11 units of pork. All right, let's jump over now to budget 2. Now, this was the graph right in the middle of the page, and you had to draw on this graph a new budget line, which I've drawn on my graph, and it started at 20 pounds of fish, but went all the way out to 25 pounds of pork. When you found the equilibriums on there, and this was my estimate, I had about 15 units of pork. Well, now this is $2, so that's $30. You got a $50 budget, so you've got 20 left again. And the 20 left could be spent, in this case, on fish, and it's $2.50. And so that gives us 8 pounds of fish that we could buy. So once again on the graph, you go up and look at the equilibrium, and that's going to come down to about the 15 units of pork that I estimated in my graph, and then that led us to the other amount of 8 that would be the equilibrium you see drawn in the graph here. Now, these quantities, you and I could come up with different amounts, like 14 instead of the 15 possibly. But either way, what we're looking at is this relationship between price and quantity. And what we can find out is that if you lower the price of a product, like at $4.50, it will move way out to a higher quantity. In this case, the answer was 15. So the homework questions on the page, number 1 was for you to develop budget line 2 with the new prices of pork. And what does that look like? So we've done that in the graph above. Second part of the homework was estimate the new quantities with the new budget line and illustrate equilibrium on the above chart. Now we did that on that chart. The new equilibrium is where we found the 15, which led us to having enough money left to buy 8 pounds of the fish product. And so that is what we did in our budget. And so we can draw that, or not draw that, but we would fill that in for number 2. And so let's review those quantities a little bit. Make sure we pull the right ones. So the price of pork changed, and it changed from $4.50 is where it originally was. And when it was $4.50, we could buy or would buy 6.11. Now make sure you don't mix that up. The budget line would allow us to buy way more. But 6.11 was the equilibrium. When the price moved to $2, the equilibrium was 15. So number 2, when we talk about equilibrium quantities, make sure you don't mess up and use the budgets. All right, number 3, ask you on your homework to estimate the demand curve for pork. And so the example would be that our demand curve would have, for pork, would have 2 variables, and we've talked about these in the past, that supply and demand have 2 variables. One of those is price. Oops, excuse me in my notes here. One of them is price and one is quantity. And we graph those on an X and Y axis. Price for demand and supply we put on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis we use quantity. All right, so if I go ahead and just plot out my prices here, a high price of $4.50 or a low price of pork at $2. At $2, you would buy a ton, 15. At $4.50, you would buy 6.11. So we come back to the origin. Plot those 2 points and connect them with a simple line, and that illustrates what the demand for pork would look like. And so that's kind of the focus of our homework here, was trying to get to what does the demand for pork look like. And a couple of important things to note. One is that demand has a negative slope all the time, meaning that if you have a really high price, you will have lower quantities, or a low price, you will have higher quantities. They are negatively related. Another thing to note about this, when you're talking about the demand of pork, it is also influenced by the amount of money you have, and it's influenced by the price of fish, because that's another product you buy. So it kind of shares with us that demand and supply, or especially in demand, are related to other products.